Welcome to Austin Stories Malicious Compliance. Remember, Austin Stories podcast is available on your favorite podcast host, so check it out over there and listen as well. Let's begin. No money back? We'll see about that. Posted by Deus Ex Pirate Pete. A few years ago, when my kids were 3 and 7, we were looking for a new car for my wife. After scouring Auto Trader, we're in the UK, we saw a Mazda Zeta 6, decent mileage, couple of owners in a small Trader's down south. It was about an hour away, so we hopped in my car and went to go look at it. We arrived at the site, which had some decent looking cars, and it was a nice and tidy place, so didn't ring any alarm bells. We were greeted by 1 or 2 Romanian brothers who seemed knowledgeable and pretty free of the hard sell. I had a look around the car. Very little rust, oil looked clean, tidy inside with not too much wear. The only 2 things I found was the head unit panel was not in place correctly, and one of the brackets by the engine had a bit of a dent in it, but it was a non-functional bracket and it didn't appear to have a prang, so okay. I took it for a test drive and it was okay. My wife liked it, so we paid part cash, part card. A few days later, after sorting the insurance, we went and collected it. By the time we got home, my wife got out and immediately said, "There's something wrong with this car." I took it for a drive, and yes, it had low power, sounded terrible, and did not feel safe. I immediately rang them, and they were pleasant enough and said bring it back and they would have their garage look at it, the same garage that had MOT'd it barely 2 weeks earlier. I said I didn't want to bring it back and I would pay out of my pocket to get it assessed by my garage. They didn't like this, but I didn't give them a choice. After a couple of days of being at my local garage, who we've used for years and trust, even though they're a bit pricey, we got the report. It ran to 2 pages, which I will summarize using the comment the mechanic gave us when we picked it up. "Mechanically, this is the worst car I have ever seen. How it passed an MOT is beyond me. You wouldn't have seen it on a visual inspection, but this is a nail." Oh dear. So I rang the dealer and sent them the report. Again, pleasant enough, said bring it back and we can discuss it and sort out the refund. Cue the malicious compliance. So, the following Saturday, now 1.5 weeks since we bought it, we all trooped back down there and walked into their little Portakabin office. The 2 brothers were sat with their faces like slapped bums. "I will tell you now, sir, you will not be getting a refund today, not until our garage has checked it." My wife and I looked at each other and our hearts sank. What followed was an hour of back and forth with me explaining that we were within our rights to a full refund within 30 days of purchase. Now, this is true for goods in the UK, but I had no idea if it applied to vehicles. After an hour, my wife and I stepped outside. The kids were getting bored and fractious. "What are we going to do?" says my wife. "Well, I'm not leaving without a refund," I said. Agreed. And that was it. We went back into that office. We argued back and forth, revisited the same point over and over, while the kids moaned and cried and begged to leave. But we sat there and we argued very calmly, very matter-of-factly, without getting angry or raising our voices. At a couple of points, one brother left to serve people who had walked into the yard, and at one point he came in with another couple who were interested in a car. They heard us talking, and I slyly shook my head at the couple, and they backtracked and left. One of the brothers was raging behind his eyes. They threatened to call the police, and I begged them to do it so we could clear this up and leave. They didn't. After, and I am not exaggerating, 5 hours of this, my wife and I stepped out, and we were stood just outside the office door. "Look, we can't stay here any longer. The kids are hungry and tired and mental," my wife says. I saw the door open, barely an inch. "Okay, take my car and go feed them. I'm not leaving. I think I'll just call the police and get this sorted, but if I have to stay here until tomorrow morning, we are getting our money back," I said. I noticed the door close again. "Really?" she said. "Just give it a minute. Let's go back in a sec." "Okay," she says, looking irritated. We go back in and one brother is counting out cash on the table. At this point, it's early evening. Sir, the deal we will do is, we will give you a full refund if you don't mention this car on any review site. It was X in cash and X on a card, yes? Less than 5 minutes later, we were back in our car, leaving the nail behind, cash in hand and card refunded. We had found a pub that does food, and we were heading there rapidly. The kids were okay now that they knew food was near. With everything sorted, my wife and I looked at each other for a second and cheered and whooped, hollered, and banged the steering wheel, making the little lad cry, bless him. We could not believe that after 5 hours of back and forth, crying kids, belligerent salesmen, we had won. We had flipping well won. This sort of thing never happened to us, and yet, there we were. We felt like the kings of the world, and no one would ever mess with us. This MC right here is dedication. Like, Dad here, bless his soul, he went in, he's like, no, we know what's right, and we're getting that right answer back to us. And the other guys, this is so beautiful because the salesman knew that these people were driving sales away that came in the door, screwing them out of more money that they could have had way more of if they had just stuck to their plan and been honest. Actually, no, that probably wasn't even their plan at all. Way to go, OP, for your due diligence, your determination, not giving up for your family, and very good malicious compliance. You can't use a competitor's phone, posted by MaliciousCompliance. Well, folks, for those of you who don't know, I work on cell phone towers. I used to work in an extremely remote rural area for a now defunct small cell phone company. The conversations are to the best of my recollection. The area I worked was the type of area where you could drive for hours and not see anything but field, forest, and animals. Most of the sites I had were what is referred to as island sites, meaning that they don't hand off to another cell tower. And most of these sites were about 30 minutes apart on a good day. Well, I worked nights, but you get the drift. So it came around that a competitor had located quite a few sites near our sites. I, being of the mindset of efficiency, purchased a phone from them, and with approval from my boss, kept it ready, especially during upgrades. But he was the type, when anyone above him says, "Boo," he'd jump and ask if he jumped high enough or if he should jump again. So a couple of months later, boss's boss leaves and we get new boss's boss who spent 250% of his life in the confines of New York City. Within his first week, he's working the switch and sees me call in from our competitor's number. Of course, he takes offense to this, and it quickly comes down that nobody may use a competitor's phone. I bring up my concerns, but you know, they don't need to do this in New York City, so we're not going to do this. Mind you, my job is to shut down our sites and upgrade or repair them. Yes, I'm the guy you love to hate when you can't make a phone call. And so it happens a short time later, I'm at one of my most remote sites, a 45-minute drive to the next site on a good day. About 4 hours from home. Now I do my diligence, I call the switch, I tell them what I need them to change, and shut down the site. An hour later, the site's not up. So I go through everything on my end. Yep, everything's good. Crap. Now there's a couple of payphones, but they were the competitor's phone. So I start driving. It takes me about an hour and a half to get to the next site because of a freak blizzard. Crap, that site's down too. Roll on to the next site, usually in about 30 minutes, but it's snowing hard and the roads are crap. 2.5 hours on the road after leaving the original site, I finally get service. So I pull over, and in 5 minutes, we figured out the switch crossed a number and took down the wrong site. Switch promises to fix it, and I drive 3 hours back to the original site. 30 minutes later, it's still not up. This time, it takes an hour to get to the closest site, call the switch again, and they get it up after about 30 minutes, and I verify it's up. Hooray! But I still have to drive back, clean up, and make some testing calls. 18 some odd hours after I left my driveway, I pull back in and submit my time, complete with the overtime. It's my Friday, so I turn off my phone and I hit the bed. Monday morning, I turn on my phone for our weekly call-in meeting, and I crap you not, it buzzes with new text and voicemails for 20 straight minutes, all from boss and boss's boss. Well, I jump on the call, and first thing I hear is boss's boss. Why the heck did you have a nearly 9-hour outage for a 30-minute upgrade? Before I get a word in, and how dare you claim 9 hours of overtime where you were clearly freaking around not doing your job? So I tell him, well, there were a series of issues outside of the site and a freak snowstorm slowed my response. I hit send on emails that I had already prepared before clocking out for the weekend with a full rundown of events of the night, as a reply to the emails coming down from him dismissing my needs for a competitor's phone, and included his boss, the vice president of the company. Boss's boss says, I don't want to freaking hear excuses from you. Why didn't you just use a freaking payphone and call for help? Literally everyone on the call groaned. In case you don't remember, I just replied to a series of emails where you forbade me, under threat of termination, from using a competitor's phone. At this point, I hear VP join our call. And since payphones are owned by a competitor, I spent 6 hours driving around in a blizzard searching for service instead of spending 45 minutes to an hour and making a call on a competitor's phone. I never freaking threatened to terminate anyone. Don't be stupid. You could have used a payphone. The VP cuts in. It appears, boss, that you do not remember what you said, and Mr. Kerr has clearly documented his actions on the night in question. Boss, please call me immediately. Thank you everyone else for your time this morning. Please have a good day. This meeting is over. Boss's boss was removed shortly afterwards, having a fairly rocky rest of his short employment. I now work for the company which purchased our competitor. I've moved to my home state, though I still work a rural market, and it's not quite as bad. This is the greatest thing because this was covering his butt. His boss said, do this. You get that stuff in writing. You get that down. And you say, all right, well, hey, if this fallout hits, you told me to do the thing. I am just following your rules. You are safe, ideally, because the boss told you to do it. You did it. You said this is not a good idea. The boss does it anyway. And then fallout comes on him. OP, you handled this very eloquently, it's top of the line, top notch. Nice work, OP. Return the car empty? Done. Posted by MA77MC. Talking to my grandmother earlier today reminded me of this story from a number of years ago. I live in Sydney and used to fly up to the Gold Coast around 3 or 4 times a year to check on my grandmother. Now, the whole family was in Sydney, so someone would usually pop up once each month to help her out. Anyway, I would always rent a car from Hertz when I arrived. At the time, they offered a prepaid fuel option where you would pay an amount and not need to refuel before return. It was usually less than you would pay at the local service station, so I usually took this option. As I picked up the keys to this shiny new manual Toyota Corolla, the woman said to me, "So you have the prepaid fuel, just bring it back empty." After a few days of relaxing by the beach, I ran a few errands for my grandmother in the morning before my 1500 flight. When the fuel light comes on and the words of Hertz staff ring in my ear, "Bring it back empty." Not wanting to push it, I pulled into 7-Eleven and put 2 liters in and went on my way. The light didn't extinguish, but with the distance I needed to cover, I figured I'd be safe. About 1300, my grandmother is pushing me out the door, telling me to catch my flight, so I make the 6-kilometer trip to the airport, the whole time anxiously wondering if I'll make it with the fuel remaining. As I was coming up on the airport, I felt the engine sputter, but it was still going. Heading in, it started sputtering more, so much so that I genuinely thought that I'd run out mere meters from my destination. As I pulled through the boom gate for rental returns, I put my foot down and got a final burst of acceleration, the car determined to be the little engine that could, my finish line in sight, and the car is gonna make it. Until it didn't. The car stalled. With the momentum, I had pulled it into a spot marked Avis, and it only made it about halfway in. I tried in vain to restart it, but it wasn't to be. I got out and pushed the little engine that could into bay 109. I was 11 bays short of the first marked Hertz, and I was a broken man, my goal so near yet so far. Torment ran through my mind. Did those 11 bays mean that I was short of my goal to bring it back empty? I mean, it was in the rental car park after all, and it wasn't uncommon for people to just, park in a spot and ignore who owns the spot. I walk into the terminal, carry on roller bay in one hand, car keys in the other, and walk up to the rental returns. "Can I help you?" the same young woman asks as I walk up to her. "I'm returning a car," I said. She takes the paperwork and asks where I'd parked it. "Bay 109, it says Avis," I respond, her not looking up. She shrugs and talks into the radio on the counter. "Return 109, she finally says. "Did you fill it up?" I say no, and she asks roughly how much is left. "Well, none," I say. "Oh, so the petrol light is on, no worries," she says. No, I reply. "I mean, it ran out of fuel as I drove in. I had to push it into the parking spot." The helpful woman gives me a blank stare for a full 10 seconds. "Wait, you let it run out? You said return it empty, so I accepted your challenge. It seems I win," I said with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. The staff member turns to her colleague, points at me, and says, "Prepaid fuel, and he says he ran out in the car park." The guy looks at me with a smirk and says, "Really?" "Well, it wouldn't start back up," I reply as someone comes in from the outside to get the keys. "It's out of fuel," the woman says. "That's okay, I'll run up to Shell after I've washed it," he replies. Both terminal staff look at him as the woman, looking at me, says, "No, the customer says he had to push it into the spot." Cue the largest eyes I've ever seen. I have to see this. He walks out with me, and the guy from behind the counter following behind opens the car and tries to start it. It's cranking, but it won't turn over as all three of us burst out laughing. "I've never had one fully out before," he says when I tell him. "The woman in there told me to bring it back empty," as I walk inside, laughing to check my bags. "Hey, she said bring it back empty. You brought it back empty." I mean, they were pretty dead set on saying, hey, if it's prepaid, you do the prepaid thing, you don't fill it up. Well, hey, you had to get it back. You had to do your thing. They said to bring it back empty. You did. They just didn't specify where and all the little details, and that is exactly why this is malicious compliance, OP. Boss gaslights me, so I ruin her to everyone. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss this awesome story, and I'll see you there.